Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about criminal justice reform here in Korea. Yes, it's not just Kim Kardashian in the United States advocating for reforms to the justice system. We have a huge debate going on right now here in Korea, and it's sort of like two divorced parents wanting to get full custody of the child, only for their own benefit to exert full control and power, never once asking, what is best for the kid. And it's as if like the only two parents can see a world where either one of them has complete control or the other, and there's no middle ground. And this is where, again, these old Korean men are getting it wrong. Okay, so what is the whole debate? It's not even being called criminal justice reform, it's being called prosecution reform. And why does this really matter, especially on our channel? Well, if there is some sort of crime committed and it goes against the laws, in order for you to be able to get the criminal the punishment they deserve, it's not a Judge Judy situation. Again, I have a problem with that show, not because it's super entertaining, but because it's presenting arbitration. It's not real. It's not a real court case. It's a real case that has been thrown into arbitration. And that's why, that lady can just pretend she's being all like, well, let's just weigh what makes sense. No. In the real world of the law and the courts, it all comes down to what evidence do they have and who gets to collect it, and then who gets to use that evidence in order to prosecute. Now, here in Korea, there's been a huge debate of trying to get the evidence gathering away from the prosecution, and it's been separated somewhat. But why is it a problem here in Korea if you have the same people who are allowed to then go to the courts and say like, okay, this person is guilty and we collected the evidence? Well, that doesn't sound so bad in a perfect world, but y'all know we don't live in a perfect world here in Korea. So what it does is essentially creates a let's look at it, the criminal justice system, especially in Korea, makes more sense if you put your mind in the eyes of a rich criminal. So it's much easier to manage a bribery situation if you have only one group of people, one team that is responsible for prosecuting you, and even before that, being able to collect the evidence. So if there's no evidence, there's no case. So if you can get to the people who have complete control over the entire process, it's so much easier. Why is it harder if they share this investigation power with the police? Well, the police can present all this information and be like, dude, this guy is so obviously guilty. We have all of the evidence. Now, because of the laws here in Korea, only the prosecutors can then take it, to the courts and then see if they can be sentenced. If the prosecutors are like, oh yeah, but that's my friend, I don't want to send my friend to jail, then they get to completely decide whether you're going to jail or not. Think about that for a second. If they don't, you have to think about it not in the sense of like they're going to automatically do what's good or right or fair or what is lawful. They're going to do what is in their best interest based on the immense power they have to even press the start button. So it's essentially like, yeah, if you feed it through the system fairly, then people should be getting punished according to whatever the law says. But if you can control whether or not that guilty person even enters the system, you have immense power. And how do you justify that? You can't just, on the surface to the people be like, oh, well, they bribed me, so I'm not going to send him in. No, basically be like, you bribed me, but there's no evidence against him, or the evidence doesn't stick, or you can manipulate the evidence in a way where you can get lesser charges and negotiate. And so just because you did something wrong that everybody senses as something wrong, it has to match up with a matching law that has a matching punishment. And sometimes that punishment on the books even is a lot lower than you think. So you have all these exorbitant cases here in Korea, and like a lot of people around the world are like, what? They only got like 3 years, and then like they got released after a year and a half? Like, what? That's so basically the price tag on crimes generally is small here, but you can even mitigate the way that, like, when you have a fancy lawyer, they mitigate that more, is that they try to make the case so that what you did is triggering much lower prices. If prices are essentially your punishment, instead of like triggering something that's expensive, they'll try to find ways to make the evidence trigger something very low, or something that, they can kind of overlook. And how do you coordinate that easily? Well, you have only one group in power in charge of the evidence. So the debate now has been, the prosecution for years has just been abusing their position because they are the ones that go in and they do the search and seizure of evidence, the dramatic thing where they come in with the blue boxes, and starting from the blue boxes that become sealed, if the prosecutor doesn't want to like nab their friend, they go in, they're like, we're gonna get the evidence, and then they're like, all right, get the Kleenex, get the blank papers, and get a couple of books and call it a day. Let's say we collected the evidence. And so the person collecting the evidence has a huge amount of power. So now, see, the problem with this is that we have seen from the SJM case that if you just give all the power to the police, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to abuse the power. So it's not a question of what is, for these guys that are fighting each other, they basically want all the power to themselves. It's not they keep saying it's for the public, they keep saying it's for the greater good, but really it's more about like, dude, I want to be at the head of the negotiating table when I'm negotiating the bribes. So if the police are being like, dude, it's not fair that the prosecution get to have all of the bribes, the police want to have more power with all of the bribes. Now, I'm not saying like all police collect bribes or all prosecutors collect bribes, but the incentive structure, when you have all of the power in just one group, is eventually going to create incentives where that is the economy, and that has been the established economy here. So now the prosecutors don't want to lose that power, the police want to gain that power. So really it's basically between whether the police can control all the investigations or whether the prosecution can. Now, the way that we've seen it emerge over the past few years was that the prosecution lost some of this investigative powers. Apparently, they only have direct investigative authority for 6 major crimes, but critics are saying that, but in practice, they still kept all the control because they can create demands on the police while they're doing investigations for the other types of crimes and thereby control the process. In Korea, if you have the order making power, like command making power, you have a lot of power. It's not as if like, oh, it would be nice if you would. We might say it would be nice if you would, but basically that means like you better listen, otherwise you're going to be dead. And so if they have that sort of control on the police, then the critics are saying like, so the prosecution still has all the power, nothing has changed. Now, the debate has shifted a bit in terms of like, well, what do other countries do? and each side has been reinterpreting other countries' prosecution systems in their advantage. Some saying like, oh yeah, of course it's completely separate. The other ones are saying like, nope, 27 out of the 35 OECD countries all guarantee that the prosecutors have investigative rights. But both are trying to con the Korean people. What is not being really brought up, except some Korean media has been talking about this, only two countries really completely separated, Australia and Israel. Most of the other countries have a very complex or shared investigative and prosecution type of system. And if you just look at the United States, the Department of Justice leads federal crime investigations, but within the Department of Justice, that's where you have organizations like the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, the IRS, USS, SEC, DHS. So if you don't know what those acronyms are, this ranges where it's either like it can go anything from really hard federal crimes to drug enforcement to firearms, and then IRS, that's tax. A U.S. Secret Service is USS, and that is for like identity theft or digital crimes. And then Security and Exchange Commissions is SEC, so that's the federal agency that investigates like financial crimes, you know, like when people are getting in trouble with like the stock market and stuff like that. And so all of these different agencies are under just the Department of Justice, and this is just one of the major, like, if you could kind of think of it as like a conglomerate of agencies that have different types of investigative power. And then of course they hand it off to U.S. attorneys' offices within the country. So I guess the U.S. attorney's office is like our version of the prosecution. So the prosecution has about 6,000 people distributed all around Korea, and they're the ones that go into the courts and then they prosecute criminals, but they're also in charge of the investigation if they're not sharing it with the police, and they're always trying to shut the police out because they want the full control. Whereas here you'll see in the United States, like the police can do the investigation, all these different government agencies can do the investigation. They have some sort of complex agreement, I guess, where like they try to make sure that the evidence is not going to be like tainted by so many different people. But you see those cases where people are like, no, this is our jurisdiction, no, we're going to take it. But the fact is that there are many roads leading to the same prosecution. That is the difference here, where you have different agencies. And I think that is the critical piece that is missing in the debate here in Korea. Because why? We still live under this autocracy or emperor mindset where like people want to only deal with one king. Who is the only person in charge? Why? Because it's so much easier. You kind of check to only one person. You only have to figure out one set of people to like kind of keep your story straight and coordinate like, you know, whose kid you're gonna put in which company, you know, just as like a hire. It gets complicated when you have all these different agencies with all these different people who have power, and you don't know which one is going to be in charge of the investigation. It makes, you know, manipulating the justice system that much more complex. And then also the people who are either in the prosecution or in the police, they want to have everything. They kind of feel like, well, if we just have it, we'll do it the best. And the other side says, no, if we just have it, we'll do it the best. But we all know that any Korean man with absolute power is going to be a tyrant and a dictator. And do we even have to? I don't even know why South Koreans don't even remind themselves that the constant reminder of that is just in North Korea. That's what happens when you give one Korean man absolute power. it just turns into a dictatorship. We don't even have to imagine what would it be like if we let this get out of control. Oh, it's just up there, 38 miles away. So it makes absolutely no sense for this debate to continuously be about who should have 100% control. I think perhaps the new system, if the transition committee, can work on finding a different way where you have decentralized methods of investigative authority, because evidence should be the evidence. The star should be the law. Like, who is the head honcho? It's not the king, it's the law. What is the main focus? It's the system, not the title of whoever is managing the system. Who is the main focus and primary target customer or person to be served? It's not the policeman or the prosecutor or their family or their well-being. It's the well-being of the people. People always forget about that. It's going to be the same old that Korean people don't want. They want true reform, and yet in the minds of many old school Kkondae or older Koreans is like, reform means I need to take the power away from that person and have 100% control and do it my way. That is not the long-term solution or even a short-term solution. In the year 2022, we should wise up to the fact that we should probably not put everything in the hands of one group of old Korean men. All right, guys, what do you think? What is like the justice system like in your country? And geez, I do think that we do have to fix this, because as we've seen with the SJM case, it is so unfair when the evidence gets manipulated, not by the criminals themselves, but the people who are actually supposed to be collecting, managing, and using that evidence. That is what gets the public so infuriated. All right, guys. Well, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.